It's funny how memory works. It isn't a perfect recording, a faithful playback of events as they happened. It's more like a collage, curated by the heart. The moments that shine brightest are the ones your soul chooses to keep, polishing them over and over until they gleam with an almost holy light. When I think of the beginning, of the real beginning with Clara, my mind doesn't go to our first date or the first time we said, "I love you." It goes to Santorini. 2 years into our marriage, a marriage that existed more on FaceTime and across budget airline aisles than in a shared home, we stole a week for ourselves. I was drowning in a project for the Berlin-based tech firm I worked for remotely, a cascade of deadlines and passive-aggressive emails from my project lead. My family, ever the chorus of loving concern, kept asking when I was going to be a proper husband and have my wife move to Germany, when we were going to start a real life. They didn't understand that our life, fragmented as it was, felt more real than anything I'd ever known. Clara was feeling the pressure too. Her job at a marketing firm in London was demanding, and she was navigating the treacherous currents of office politics with her usual blend of sharp intellect and take-no-prisoners attitude. She was, and still is, the strongest person I have ever met. A force of nature packed into a 5'5" frame, with eyes the color of an English storm cloud, and a laugh that could shatter glass or melt glaciers, depending on her mood. But in Santorini, all of that fell away. The pressures of London and Berlin, of our families, of our perpetually unsettled future, dissolved into the Aegean blue. I remember standing with her on the balcony of our whitewashed villa in Aya, the caldera sprawling beneath us like a sleeping giant. The setting sun bled across the sky in hues of orange, pink, and gold. Clara leaned her head against my shoulder, her usually tense shoulders relaxed. "This is it, isn't it?" she murmured, her voice soft against the gentle whisper of the sea breeze. "This is what it's all for." "This is everything," I agreed, my arm tightening around her. In that moment, the 2 years of goodbyes at airport terminals, of waking up alone, of celebrating anniversaries through a screen, it all felt like a small price to pay. Because the reward was this: a perfect, unassailable peace, with the woman I was convinced was the other half of my soul. We had met in a way that felt both modern and impossibly romantic. A language exchange app. I was trying to polish my English. She was half-heartedly attempting to learn German for a potential work transfer that never materialized. Our first few conversations were clumsy, filled with grammatical errors and cultural misunderstandings. But underneath the awkwardness, something sparked. A shared sense of humor, dry and sarcastic. A mutual love for old movies, and a disdain for reality television. Our first in-person meeting was in Amsterdam, a neutral ground. I took a train from Berlin. She flew from London. I remember seeing her standing by the designated meeting point at Schiphol Airport, looking smaller and more beautiful than her profile picture. She was wearing a black leather jacket and a defiant look on her face, as if daring the world to disappoint her. It didn't. We spent 3 days in a blissful haze, walking along canals, getting lost in the Jordan district, and talking for hours in cozy brown cafes. By the time I put her on the train back to the airport, I knew I was in serious trouble. I was completely, irrevocably in love. Our courtship was a whirlwind of weekend trips. Paris, Prague, Rome. We were tourists in our own love story. We discovered that our personalities, which seemed so different on the surface, my quiet, methodical German nature versus her fiery, expressive English spirit, were perfectly complementary. I grounded her, she made me fly. I was the anchor, she was the sails. It was during a trip to the Scottish Highlands, surrounded by mist-shrouded lochs and ancient hills, that she told me about her deepest-held conviction. We were huddled by a fireplace in a tiny pub, nursing glasses of whiskey. An old couple at the next table was having a quiet, bitter argument. We couldn't hear the words, but the body language was universal. The woman's hurt, the man's defensive posture. Clara watched them for a moment, her jaw tight. "I can't stand it," she said, turning back to me. "I can't stand liars, cheaters." It wasn't an unusual sentiment, but she said it with a ferocity that surprised me. "My dad," she explained, her voice dropping. He had an affair when I was a teenager. It didn't just break up our family, it shattered my mum. It turned her into this fragile, suspicious person. I watched the man I worshipped lie to the woman I loved day after day. The betrayal, it's the one thing I can never, ever forgive. It's not just the act itself. It's the deception. It's making the person who trusts you most in the world feel like a fool. It's the ultimate act of cowardice and disrespect. I reached across the table and took her hand. "You'll never have to worry about that with me," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. She looked at me, her stormy eyes searching mine. "I know," she said, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through. "That's why you're different. You're the most honest person I know. You're safe." Being called safe by Clara felt like being awarded the highest honor. For a woman who built walls to protect her heart, granting me access was the ultimate declaration of trust. We got married a year later, in a small ceremony at a registry office in Copenhagen, again on neutral ground. It was just us and two strangers for witnesses. We didn't want the fuss or the family drama. We just wanted to be husband and wife. That night, we celebrated with expensive champagne and cheap pizza in our hotel room, planning a future where we would finally close the distance between us. Germany or the UK. We'd figure it out. It was just a detail. The important part was that we had found each other. We were a team. The first 2 years of our marriage continued in much the same way as our courtship. I would fly to London 2 weekends a month, and she would come to Berlin for one. We'd spend holidays together, either with her family in the Cotswolds or mine near the Black Forest. It was expensive and exhausting, but we made it work. We had our rituals, the good morning and good night texts without fail. The nightly video calls where we'd talk about our days, watch a show together on synced screens, or just sit in comfortable silence while we worked. We had a Snapchat streak that was a running joke, a silly, meaningless number that had somehow become a symbol of our daily connection. Those moments were the glue that held us together across the miles. I remember the time she had a terrible flu, and I booked a last-minute flight after work on a Friday, flew to London, took a taxi to her flat, and was there with soup and medicine before midnight. The look of surprise and love on her feverish face was worth every penny and every lost hour of sleep. Or the time my father had a health scare, and I was falling apart with worry. She dropped everything, took a day off work, and spent 8 hours on a video call with me, not even talking most of the time, just being a quiet, constant presence that kept me from spiraling into panic. We shared everything. Our fears, our ambitions, our frustrations. I told her about the suffocating weight of being the responsible son, the one my parents relied on. She told me about her deep-seated desire for stability, a home, a life that wasn't lived out of a suitcase, a yearning born from the instability of her childhood after her parents' divorce. "You're my home," I told her once during a tearful goodbye at Heathrow. "Don't be cheesy," she'd sniffled, wiping her eyes. "But you're mine too." I believed it. I believed we had a love strong enough to withstand anything. Distance was just geography. Logistics were just problems to be solved. We had the foundation, absolute trust, unwavering honesty, and a shared vision of a future together. I had found my other half, my partner in everything. The search was over. I was home. The tragedy is that I didn't realize I was the only one who felt that way. The foundation I thought was solid granite was already turning to sand, and I was too busy staring at the horizon to notice the ground crumbling beneath my feet. The cracks appear. The first hairline crack appeared, as they so often do, not with a bang, but with a sigh of frustration. It was during one of my weekends in London, about 6 months ago. The initial joy of reunion had faded, and the Sunday evening blues were setting in, casting a familiar pall over Clara's small, stylish flat in Clapham. The air was thick with the unspoken dread of my impending flight back to Berlin. "We can't keep doing this," Clara said, staring out the window at the rain-slicked street. She wasn't looking at me. "I know," I replied, my voice weary. We'd had this conversation 100 times, a circular debate that always ended in a stalemate. We just need to decide. There's nothing to decide, Liam, she snapped, turning to face me. Her arms were crossed, her body language a fortress. I have a career here, a good one. I've just been promoted to senior account manager. My friends are here. My family is a train ride away. It makes no sense for me to move to Germany, where I don't speak the language fluently and would have to start all over again. And my job is remote, I countered, the familiar defensive tone creeping into my voice. I can technically work from anywhere. I know. So what's the problem? She asked, her voice rising. What has been the problem for the last 2 years? You say you can work from anywhere, but you're still there. This was the heart of it. The promise I had made, first in that Copenhagen hotel room and a dozen times since, that I would be the one to move. It had been easy to say, a simple solution to a complex problem. But the reality was daunting. Moving to London meant navigating a labyrinth of visa paperwork, finding a new place to live in one of the world's most expensive cities, and most terrifyingly, leaving the country my entire support system called home. My parents were getting older. My sister had just had a baby. The unspoken expectation was for me to stay, to be the reliable son. Every time I brought up the move, my mother's voice would get tight with a carefully controlled panic that twisted my stomach into knots. It's complicated, Clara. The visa, the cost of living. I began, but she cut me off. Excuses, she said, her voice laced with contempt. They've been excuses for 2 years. The truth is you don't want to. You'd rather I give up everything than you be mildly inconvenienced. It was a gross oversimplification, a deliberate misreading of my fear as indifference. And it hurt. That's not fair, I said, my voice low. You know it's not just an inconvenience. It's a huge life change. I just need more time to get everything in order. Time? We've been married for 2 years, Liam. How much more time do you need? While you're getting things in order, I'm living here alone. I come home to an empty flat every night. I go to weddings and parties and have to explain why my husband lives in another country. It's embarrassing. It's lonely. I'm tired of it. This was her go-to weapon, painting a picture of her solitary suffering, a direct consequence of my inaction. It always worked. Guilt was a powerful motivator. But this time, something in me bristled. My life wasn't exactly a party either. The constant travel was draining. My apartment in Berlin felt temporary, a glorified waiting room. I felt torn between the family I was born into and the one I had chosen. Instead of saying that, instead of being vulnerable and sharing my own fears, I did what I always did. I shut down. I saw the conversation escalating into a full-blown fight, one that would ruin our last few hours together, and I retreated. Okay, I said, raising my hands in surrender. Okay, you're right. I'll look into the visa requirements again this week. I promise. It was a hollow promise, and we both knew it. I just wanted the fight to stop. She saw the capitulation for what it was, not agreement, but avoidance. The look on her face was a mixture of triumph and profound disappointment. She had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The rest of the evening was spent in a tense, cold silence. The usual goodbye at the airport the next morning was perfunctory, a quick, sterile kiss that felt more like an obligation than an expression of love. That argument became the blueprint for all the ones that followed. The topic was always the same, the move. My procrastination, her frustration. But the nature of the fights began to change. She became sharper, more confrontational. She would dredge up past failures, every broken or delayed promise, using them as evidence in the case she was building against me. My defense remained the same, emotional withdrawal. I would absorb her anger, her accusations, and offer placating, empty reassurances until the storm passed. I thought I was being the calm, rational one, the peacekeeper. I see now that my silence wasn't peace. It was a vacuum. And vacuums have a way of pulling in other things to fill the void. The pressure on her was mounting from other directions too. Her new role at work was more demanding than she'd anticipated. She was managing a team for the first time, working longer hours, and dealing with a difficult client. She started mentioning her boss, Mark, more often. "Mark is a genius, but he's so demanding," she'd say over FaceTime, rubbing her temples. Or, "Mark actually backed me up in the meeting today." It was a nice change. He was just a name, a character in the story of her workday. I encouraged her, told her she was doing a great job, that she would win him over. I didn't think twice about it. Then the small, almost imperceptible changes began. She started taking a sudden, intense interest in her appearance. She'd always been beautiful and stylish, but this was different. It was more deliberate. She bought a whole new wardrobe of work clothes, sleeker, more expensive dresses, and sharp blazers. She started getting professional manicures every week, something she'd always dismissed as a waste of money. She changed her hair, cutting it into a chic, sophisticated bob that framed her face perfectly. "You look amazing," I told her, genuinely impressed. "New job, new me," she'd replied with a shrug, but there was a flicker of something else in her eyes. Excitement, maybe. Her habits changed, too. She started going for after-work drinks with her team, sometimes not getting home until late. Our nightly FaceTime calls became less frequent. "Sorry, babe, just got in. I'm exhausted." "Rain check?" the text would read. At first, I was understanding. Her new job was stressful. She needed to decompress, to bond with her team. But a pattern began to emerge. The late nights often coincided with days she described as particularly stressful. Days when Mark was being impossible, or Mark actually saved the day. He was becoming a more prominent character in her narrative. The final blaring alarm bell, the one I willfully chose to snooze, was about her phone. She, who had always been an open book, suddenly became fiercely protective of it. She would angle the screen away from me when she was texting. She started taking it into the bathroom with her when she showered. One evening, while we were watching a movie on her sofa, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. Before I could even glance at it, her hand shot out like a viper and snatched it up, her back immediately tensing. "Just work," she mumbled, quickly typing a reply before putting the phone face down. A cold knot of suspicion tightened in my gut. It was an ugly, unfamiliar feeling. This was Clara, my Clara, who despised secrets and lies more than anything. I was being paranoid. I was letting the distance and the constant tension get to me. I was projecting my own insecurities onto her. I told myself to trust her. Trust was the foundation. Without it, we had nothing. So I pushed the doubt down. I ignored the warning signs, the red flags that, in retrospect, were not just waving, but practically screaming in my face. I clung to the image of the woman I had married, the woman who had held my hand in a pub in Scotland and promised me a life of honesty. I chose to believe in the memory of her, because believing in the woman she was becoming was too terrifying to contemplate. It was a willful ignorance, a desperate act of self-preservation, and it was the biggest mistake of my life. The truth laid bare. The end of my blissful ignorance came on a Tuesday. It was a particularly cold and gray day in London, even for November. I had flown in the night before, a surprise trip to try and patch things up after our worst fight yet. The previous weekend, over the phone, she had called me a coward. "You're a coward, Liam. You're hiding in Germany because you're scared of growing up." The words had stung more than she could ever know, mostly because they contained a kernel of truth. I thought a grand gesture was in order. I showed up at her door with a bouquet of her favorite peonies, my heart pounding with a mixture of hope and anxiety. She was surprised, that much was clear. But the surprise quickly curdled into something else. Annoyance? Resentment? It was like my unannounced presence was an inconvenience, an interruption to a life that was now running on a schedule I was no longer privy to. We spent the day in a fragile truce. We walked through Hyde Park, the bare trees clawing at the overcast sky. We made small talk. The conversation was stilted, a minefield of topics we were both trying to avoid. The elephant in the room, our future, the move, was so large it felt like it was walking between us. That evening, we ordered takeaway and sat on her sofa, the silence punctuated only by the sound of cutlery on ceramic. She seemed distracted, her thumb constantly swiping across the screen of her phone. Around 10 p.m., she announced she was tired and was going to take a shower and head to bed. She took her phone with her. I sat there on the sofa, the half-eaten container of pad thai growing cold on the coffee table. The knot of suspicion I had been suppressing for weeks was back, and it was suffocating me. Her behavior was so transparently guilty. The secrecy with her phone, the emotional distance, the way she couldn't look me in the eye. My mind raced. Am I going crazy? Am I the jealous, controlling husband I never wanted to be? Or was my intuition, the part of my brain that had been screaming at me for months, finally right? I knew what I had to do. I hated myself for it. It felt like a violation, a betrayal in its own right. But I had to know. My sanity depended on it. When she came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, her face scrubbed clean of makeup, she looked for a moment like the old Clara. She gave me a tired smile. I'm heading to bed. Don't be too late. She left her phone charging on the kitchen counter. It was the first time she'd left it unattended in my presence for months. Maybe it was a sign. Maybe I was wrong about everything. I waited for 20 minutes, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could hear the soft, even sound of her breathing from the bedroom. I stood up, my legs feeling like lead, and walked to the kitchen counter. The phone screen was dark. I picked it up. It felt heavy, like a bomb. I knew her passcode. It was the date of our first meeting in Amsterdam. A small part of me prayed it wouldn't work, that she would have changed it. That would have been proof enough. But my thumb traced the familiar pattern, and the screen lit up. I opened her messaging apps. WhatsApp first. I scrolled through the list of names. Her mum, her sister, her friends from uni. Then I saw it. Mark? The conversation history was long. I opened it, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold the phone steady. And there it was. The end of my world, spelled out in blue and gray bubbles. It started innocuously enough. Work talk. Frustrations about clients. Inside jokes about colleagues. But as I scrolled back through the weeks, the tone shifted. It became more familiar, more intimate. The work talk was peppered with personal questions, with compliments. Mark, tough day. You handled it like a pro, as always. Clara, only because I have a good boss to learn from. Mark, I think the student is about to surpass the master. Then came the pet names. My blood ran cold. He called her Clarabelle. She called him M. I kept scrolling, a morbid compulsion driving me deeper into the wreckage of my marriage. Then I found the first real turning point. A message from about a month ago. Mark, you looked incredible in that blue dress today. Seriously, knockout. Clara, stop it, you'll make me blush. Mark, good, you should. A woman like you should be blushing all the time. My breath hitched. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. This wasn't just friendly banter. This was a man actively pursuing my wife. And she was letting him. She was encouraging him. And then, the sexting. It wasn't just flirting anymore. It was explicit. It was graphic. They talked about what they wanted to do to each other. They sent suggestive emojis. He described her body. She described his. The language was crude and passionate and utterly devastating. She was a different person in these messages. A wanton, eager stranger who was completely unrecognizable to me. But the detail that shattered me, the one that broke something deep inside me, was a single innocuous-seeming message from him. Mark, wearing those killer heels again today, I see. You know how much I love watching you walk away. Clara, I wore them just for you, winking face emoji. Mark, don't tease me, Clarabelle. You know I have a thing for your legs. Her legs. He had a thing for her legs. It was so specific, so intimate. It implied a history of observation, of private jokes, of a shared physical knowledge that excluded me entirely. It wasn't just about sex anymore. It was about a secret world they had built together, a world where I didn't exist. She was performing for him, dressing for him. While I was sitting in my apartment in Berlin, counting down the hours until our next video call, she was living a double life. The most painful part was seeing her use our language. She called him babe. It was a silly common term of endearment, but it was our word. Hearing it from her, directed at him, felt like a physical blow. It was a theft. She had taken something that belonged to us and had given it to him. I don't know how long I stood there, leaning against the kitchen counter, the cold light of the phone illuminating the tears streaming down my face. It could have been minutes or an hour. Time had ceased to have any meaning. There was only a before and an after. And I was now irrevocably in the after. I put the phone back on the counter exactly as I had found it. I walked on autopilot to the living room and sank onto the sofa. I didn't feel anger, not yet. That would come later, a raging inferno. In that moment, all I felt was a profound, hollowed-out shock, a dizzying sense of disbelief. It was like watching a film of someone else's life. This couldn't be happening to me, not to us, not with Clara, the woman whose defining moral principle was her hatred of betrayal. I stayed on that sofa all night, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the messages, the compliments, the pet names. The ghost of her betrayal filled the room, a silent, mocking presence. I had flown here to save my marriage. And in the space of a few minutes, I had discovered it was already dead. I just hadn't been informed of the time of death. When the sun finally rose, casting a weak, watery light into the room, I heard her stir. I didn't move. She walked into the living room, tying her robe. She stopped when she saw me. "You're up early," she said, a slight frown on her face. "Did you even sleep?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw the stranger she had become. The guilt was there, plain as day, hiding behind a veneer of casual concern. She knew something was wrong. "We need to talk," I said, my voice hoarse, unfamiliar to my own ears. And as I said those words, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The sweet beginning was officially over. The ultimatum. The confrontation was not a screaming match. There was no throwing of plates, no dramatic storming out. It was worse. It was quiet, tense, and surgically cruel. "What's wrong, Liam?" she asked, her voice laced with a false, cautious innocence, as she perched on the edge of the armchair opposite the sofa. She was already on the defensive. I didn't want to play games. I couldn't. I was too broken for strategy. "I saw the messages, Clara," I said. The words felt like stones in my mouth. "Between you and Mark." The mask didn't just slip. It shattered. For a fraction of a second, I saw pure, unadulterated panic in her eyes. It was a fleeting, satisfying confirmation of my discovery. Then, just as quickly, the panic was replaced by a cold, hard defiance. She straightened her back, lifting her chin. "You went through my phone?" she asked, her voice dripping with indignation. She was trying to flip the script, to make me the villain. "Don't," I said, my voice dangerously low. "Don't you dare try to make this about me. Just tell me the truth. Have you slept with him?" She held my gaze for a long moment. "No," she said. I searched her eyes for a lie, for the flicker of deceit I had become so attuned to. To my surprise, I believed her. It wasn't a comforting thought. The fact that they had reached that level of explicit intimacy without ever having physically crossed the line was, in some ways, worse. It spoke of a deeper emotional affair, of months of pent-up desire and clandestine connection. "But you wanted to," I stated. It wasn't a question. She looked away then, at a spot on the wall just past my shoulder. "It got out of hand," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "It was just a flirtation. A stupid ego boost. It didn't mean anything." "It didn't mean anything?" I echoed, a humorless laugh escaping my lips. "Clara, you called him babe. You talked about what you wanted him to do to you. You told him you wore a specific pair of shoes just for him. Don't you dare tell me it didn't mean anything." She flinched at the specifics. Good. I wanted her to know that I knew. I wanted her to feel a fraction of the humiliation I was feeling. And then, the justification began. It was the part I was dreading, the part I knew would hurt the most. "I was lonely, Liam," she said, her voice gaining strength, shifting from admission to accusation. What did you expect? You weren't here. You have not been here for years. I have been begging you to move, to start a real life with me. And what have you given me? Excuses, broken promises. Next month, after this project, as soon as I sort things out with my family. I'm your wife, and you have consistently put me last on your list of priorities. She stood up and began to pace, her movements agitated, her words flowing faster. Mark was here. He listened. He saw me. He noticed when I was having a bad day. He complimented my work. He made me feel visible. Is that so wrong? To want to feel visible? My head was spinning. She was taking my pain, my discovery of her profound betrayal, and twisting it into a referendum on my failures as a husband. She was admitting to the affair, but blaming me for it. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. So this is my fault? I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. You sexting your boss is my fault because I didn't move to London fast enough? I'm not saying it's your fault, she said, though that was exactly what she was saying. I'm saying it's a symptom of a larger problem. A problem you have refused to fix. I stayed in London for 2 more days. It was a surreal, nightmarish limbo. We were like ghosts haunting the apartment, circling each other, speaking only in short, functional sentences. Do you want tea? I'm going for a walk. The air was thick with unspoken words and accusations. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I just replayed the messages in my head, over and over, each time feeling a fresh wave of sickness and pain. I was waiting for something, an apology. A real, soul-bearing, on-her-knees apology. I needed to see genuine remorse in her eyes. I needed her to understand the magnitude of what she had done to me, to us, to the sacred trust that had been the bedrock of our entire relationship. It never came. On the final morning, as I was packing my bag to go to the airport, she came and stood in the doorway of the bedroom. She had that same defiant, determined look on her face she'd had when I first met her at Schiphol. I've been thinking, she said, her voice clear and steady. This situation, it's unsustainable. I can't live like this anymore, so I'm giving you a choice. I stopped packing and turned to face her. A choice? Yes, she said. An ultimatum, if you like. You move to London. Properly. Not in 6 months, not next year. Now, you quit your job if you have to, you find a new one here. You sell your apartment, you pack your bags, and you move here, and we start our life together. We fix this. We go to therapy. We work on it. I will be the best wife to you. I will do everything I can to earn back your trust. She paused, letting the offer hang in the air. Then came the alternative. Or, she continued, her voice hardening, you don't. You go back to Berlin. And if you get on that plane today without agreeing to move here, then we are done. I will file for divorce. The choice is yours, Liam. A future with me in London or no future at all. I stared at her dumbfounded. My wife had been caught in an emotional affair, had betrayed my trust in the most intimate way possible, and her solution was to give me an ultimatum. There was no deep apology, no acknowledgement of the pain she'd caused. Just a business proposition. A deal. Her fidelity in exchange for my capitulation. What about what you did, Clara? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Where is the apology in all of this? Where is the I'm sorry I broke your heart? I am sorry, she said, but her tone was flat, impatient. It was the kind of sorry you say when you bump into a stranger on the tube. I am sorry that you're hurt. I've told you it was a mistake. But being sorry doesn't change the facts. It doesn't change the reason it happened. The only way forward is to fix the root cause. And the root cause is you not being here. She was framing her betrayal as a logical consequence of my actions. As if it were an equation. Liam's absence plus female loneliness equals inevitable affair. She was absolving herself of all moral agency. So what you're saying is, I clarified, wanting to hear her say it out loud, you will be a good, faithful wife if I move to the UK. And if I don't, all bets are off? Yes, she said, without a hint of shame or hesitation. That's exactly what I'm saying. I gave you my loyalty when we were long distance, and it wasn't enough for you to keep your promise. So now I'm giving you a new promise. I promise to be the wife you've always wanted, but I can only do that if you are my husband, here in my life, every day. It was the most audacious, self-serving piece of logic I had ever heard. She had somehow managed to turn her betrayal into leverage. She had taken the trust she'd shattered, and was now offering to sell the pieces back to me, at the price of my entire life in Germany. During those horrible 2 days, I had called her mother. I thought naively that she would be a voice of reason. She had been through a similar betrayal after all. I explained the situation, my voice breaking over the phone. Her response was chillingly neutral. Well, these things are always very complicated, Liam. I'm sure you two will work it out. There was no support, no condemnation of her daughter's actions. Just a clinical detachment. I realized I was utterly alone in this. Her family would close ranks around her, and I would forever be the German outsider who failed to make their daughter happy. I looked at Clara standing there in the doorway, so sure of herself, so convinced of her twisted justification. I was looking for the woman I had married, the one who had cried in my arms, who hated deceit, who believed in honesty above all else. But she was gone. In her place was this cold, pragmatic stranger, negotiating the terms of my surrender. I finished packing my bag in silence. She watched me, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. I walked past her, out of the bedroom, and towards the front door. "So that's it?" she called after me. "You're just leaving?" I stopped with my hand on the doorknob and turned to look at her one last time. "You gave me an ultimatum, Clara," I said, my voice hollow. "I need to think." "There's nothing to think about," she said. "It's a simple choice. Me or your old life." But it wasn't simple. It was the most complicated, painful choice I had ever faced. I was standing at a crossroads, and both paths led off a cliff. One path was a leap of faith, a blind gamble on a woman who had already proven she couldn't be trusted. The other was the certainty of a lonely fall. I opened the door and walked out, not knowing if I would ever be back. Distance and silence. The flight from London to Berlin is only an hour and a half, but that day it felt like an eternity. I sat pressed against the window, watching the neat patchwork of the English countryside give way to the vast, indifferent gray of the North Sea. Each kilometer that passed was another stitch in the shroud that was covering my marriage. I felt utterly numb, suspended between two countries, two lives, two versions of a future that were both unbearable. Clara's ultimatum echoed in my mind. Me or your old life. It was so binary, so absolute. But my life in Germany wasn't my old life. It was just my life, my friends, my family, the familiar streets of my neighborhood, the comfort of my own language. She had framed it as a choice between her and a past I needed to shed, but it felt like a choice between her and myself. When I landed and switched my phone off airplane mode, there were no messages from her. "No? Did you land safely?" "No, I'm sorry." Nothing. Just a profound, deafening silence. A week passed. A week of me rattling around my too-quiet apartment in Berlin, feeling like a ghost. I couldn't work. I couldn't eat. I spent my days walking aimlessly through the city, ending up in places we had visited together, the bench in Tiergarten where we'd shared a pretzel, the small Italian restaurant where we'd celebrated my birthday. Every corner of the city was haunted by her memory, by the ghost of the happiness I had once taken for granted. I knew the silence couldn't last forever. The ultimatum hung in the air, a ticking time bomb. I needed to respond, but I didn't know how. My heart and my head were at war. My heart, foolish and sentimental, clung to the 7 years of love, to the memories of Santorini, to the belief that the woman I loved was still in there somewhere, buried beneath layers of resentment and guilt. My head, cold and rational, told me that trust, once broken so catastrophically, could never be fully repaired. It would be a lifetime of looking over my shoulder, of checking her phone, of second-guessing every late night at the office. Finally, I decided to break the silence. I reasoned that we were both too emotional, too hurt to make a life-altering decision. We needed space. We needed to think. I sent her a carefully worded message. Clara, I think we both need some time to process everything. The emotions are too raw right now. I suggest we take a month of no contact. No calls, no texts. Just space for both of us to think clearly about what we want and what we are willing to do to fix this. After that, we can talk. I thought it was a reasonable, mature suggestion, a way to de-escalate the situation, to take the pressure off. I was offering a truce. Her reply came back almost instantly. It was ice cold. Fine, if that's what you need. It wasn't an agreement. It was a dismissal. She didn't see it as a mutual cooling off period. She saw it as another delay tactic, another example of me running away from the problem. Her curt response told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't using this time to reflect on her betrayal. She was using it as a countdown timer for my ultimatum. The month I had proposed wasn't a truce. It was my deadline. The days that followed were the loneliest of my life. The silence I had proposed became a weapon she used against me. I had naively hoped that she might break the pact, that she might reach out with a heartfelt apology, a sign that she was suffering too. But there was nothing. The digital umbilical cord that had connected us for years was severed. No good morning texts. No funny memes sent during the day. No nightly video calls. The void she left was immense. And then, about 2 weeks into our month of silence, the symbol of our connection disappeared. Our Snapchat streak. It was a silly juvenile thing, I know. A meaningless number generated by an algorithm. But for us, it had been a daily ritual, a constant low-effort way of saying, I'm thinking of you. It started on our first trip to Amsterdam and had continued, unbroken, for over 2,000 days. Through sickness, through travel, through arguments, we had always remembered to send that one stupid picture a day to keep the little flame icon alive. It was our digital heartbeat. One morning, I woke up, opened the app out of habit, and it was gone. The number, 2147 I think, had vanished. The flame icon was extinguished. It was such a small thing, but it felt monumental. It was a deliberate act. To break a streak that long, you have to actively choose not to participate for more than 24 hours. She had let it die. She had consciously uncoupled herself from our shared history, one pixel at a time. I stared at the blank space where the number used to be, and I felt a grief so sharp it stole my breath. It was a digital funeral for our relationship. I broke my own rule. I couldn't help it. I had to know if she'd done it on purpose. The streak is gone, I texted her, my hands shaking. Her reply was swift and brutal. I know. I guess we both got busy. She was feigning nonchalance, but I knew better. It was a power move. A clear, unambiguous message. I am moving on. The clock is ticking. You are being erased. I became a mess of anxiety and desperation. I started calling her. At first she wouldn't pick up. I would leave rambling, pathetic voicemails, begging her to talk to me. Eventually she started answering, but the calls were torture. She was cold, distant, and monosyllabic. How are you? I'd ask. Fine. What have you been up to? Work. Do you miss me? Silence. The only time she showed any animation was when I brought up the ultimatum. Have you made a decision yet, Liam? She would ask, her voice suddenly sharp, businesslike. It was the only thing she wanted to talk about. Not our feelings, not her betrayal, not the possibility of healing. Just my answer. Yes or no. I felt like I was negotiating with a terrorist who was holding my own heart hostage. Her terms were clear, but the more she pushed, the more distant and cold she became, the less I felt I was fighting for a marriage, and the more I felt I was fighting for a memory. The warm, loving, principled woman I had married seemed to have vanished completely. In her place was this hard, calculating stranger who spoke of love and loyalty as if they were clauses in a contract. The month I had proposed came and went. The deadline passed in a shroud of silence. We were in a holding pattern, a state of suspended animation. I was in Germany, waiting for a sign of remorse that would never come. She was in London, waiting for an act of surrender that I didn't know if I could make. The distance between our two cities had never felt greater, but it was nothing compared to the vast, empty chasm that had opened up between our hearts. My apartment in Berlin became a pressure cooker for my thoughts. With the silence from Clara stretching into an impassable gulf, the only conversations I had were the ones inside my own head. They were relentless, circular, and agonizing. I was both the prosecutor and the defense, the judge and the condemned, in a trial with no hope of a verdict. The central exhibit of this trial was the hypocrisy. It was the one fact I couldn't reconcile, the crooked piece of the puzzle that warped the entire picture. I would lie awake at night staring at the ceiling, and my mind would stage a debate between the ghost of Clara past and the specter of Clara present. The ghost of Clara past was in that pub in Scotland, her face earnest and illuminated by the firelight. "It's the deception," she would say, her voice echoing in my memory. "It's making the person who trusts you most in the world feel like a fool. It's the ultimate act of cowardice." She was so certain, so righteous. Her moral compass pointed true north, and its cardinal direction was loyalty. I had loved that about her. I had admired her conviction. I had built my trust in her on that solid foundation. Then the specter of Clara present would materialize, her face cold and defiant as it was in her London flat. "I was lonely," she would counter, her voice sharp. "What did you expect? I'll be a good wife if you move. If not, then this is what happens." This Clara saw loyalty not as a principle, but as a commodity. It was something to be offered or withheld based on contractual obligations. Her moral compass didn't point north. It spun wildly, always landing on whatever direction best served her immediate needs. How could these two women be the same person? The question gnawed at me day and night. Had she been lying to me all along? Was that passionate speech in Scotland just a performance, a carefully crafted persona designed to win my trust? Or was she sincere then, and had she simply changed, corrupted by loneliness, by temptation, by the slow simmering resentment she felt towards me? This question inevitably led to the most painful line of inquiry, my own culpability. "This is your fault," my inner prosecutor, who sounded suspiciously like Clara, would argue. "You promised her you would move. You promised her a life together. For 2 years you broke that promise every single day. You left her alone. You forced her to attend weddings by herself, to explain your absence to her friends, to come home to an empty apartment. You created the perfect vacuum of neglect and loneliness. Of course, someone else stepped in to fill it. Mark didn't seduce your wife. You pushed her into his arms." There was a terrible, seductive logic to this argument. I would list my failings like a penitent monk. I was a coward. I was afraid of leaving my comfort zone, of disappointing my parents. I prioritized my own emotional security over her happiness. I was avoidant, shutting down during arguments instead of fighting for us. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I was a bad husband. I had failed her. Maybe I deserved this. But then the defense would rise, a small, weary voice of self-preservation. "Even if all that is true," it would whisper, "does your failure to keep a promise about logistics justify her breaking the fundamental promise of a marriage? One is a failure of action. The other is a failure of character. You delayed a move. She cultivated a secret, intimate relationship with another man, lied about it, and then showed absolutely no remorse when she was caught. Are those two sins truly equal?" This was the crux of it. I was willing to accept my share of the blame for the breakdown of our communication, for the distance, for the unresolved issues. But I could not accept the blame for her choices. She was not a passive object. She was an active participant. She chose to reply to that first flirtatious text. She chose to cultivate the relationship. She chose to lie day after day. She chose to send those explicit messages. And most damningly, she chose to weaponize her betrayal, to turn it into an ultimatum, rather than seeking forgiveness. I was desperate for a sign of true remorse. A simple, "Liam, I am so sorry. I broke your heart, and there is no excuse for what I did." If she had said that, If I had seen that she understood the depth of the wound she had inflicted, maybe, just maybe, we could have started to rebuild. But her apology was always conditional, always followed by a, "but you." It was an apology designed not to heal me, but to manage me. My mind would then drift back to the good times, the memories I had polished until they shone. Our first trip to Amsterdam, laughing until our sides hurt. Cooking together in her tiny kitchen, dancing to old records. The quiet moments of perfect companionship, reading side by side on the sofa. Were those moments real? Did she love me then? Or was I just a placeholder, a safe option until something better, or at least something closer, came along? The betrayal didn't just tarnish the present. It cast a retroactive shadow over our entire past, poisoning every happy memory with the venom of doubt. I found myself analyzing every interaction from the last year. Every late night she'd blamed on work, every time she'd been cagey with her phone, every moment of emotional distance I had attributed to stress. The pieces all fit together now, forming a picture of a long and calculated deception. And I, the trusting, loving husband, had been completely oblivious. The feeling of being a fool, the one thing she claimed to hate most in the world, was now my constant companion. So I was left with two competing narratives. Narrative A. I was a neglectful husband who broke his promises, driving his lonely, loving wife to seek comfort in the arms of another. Her actions were a cry for help, and the ultimatum was a desperate, last-ditch effort to save our marriage. The onus was on me to fix my original mistake and prove my love by moving to London. Narrative B. I was a flawed but loving husband in a difficult long-distance marriage. My wife, faced with temptation and harboring resentment, chose to betray our vows. Instead of showing remorse, she revealed a shockingly manipulative and selfish side of her character, refusing to take responsibility and using her affair as leverage to get what she wanted all along. To accept her ultimatum would be to reward her betrayal and condemn myself to a future with a woman I could never trust again. I oscillated between these two narratives 100 times a day. Sometimes I would be filled with a righteous anger, ready to call her and end it for good. Other times, a wave of desperate love and nostalgia would wash over me, and I would find myself browsing flights to London, ready to surrender, just to have a chance at getting my old Clara back. But the real question wasn't just whether I was at fault, or whether she had changed. The real agonizing question was this: even if I accepted her ultimatum and moved, could the ghost of Clara past ever truly be resurrected? Or would I be spending the rest of my life living with a stranger, forever haunted by the specter of Clara present? I am sitting in my apartment in Berlin. The late afternoon sun streams through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. On my laptop screen, two browser tabs are open. The first tab is a UK real estate website displaying a list of one-bedroom flats for rent in South London. The prices are astronomical. I imagine myself in one of them, unpacking my boxes into a life that feels both foreign and claustrophobic. I picture Clara coming home from work, a reunion awkward and strained. I see us in a therapist's office, talking about trust exercises and open communication. I see myself, years down the line, flinching every time she gets a text message from a male colleague. It is a future built on a gamble, a bet that her love is real and her betrayal was an anomaly, a bet staked with my pride, my career, and my peace of mind. The second tab is the website for a German law firm that specializes in international divorce. The language is clean, clinical, and efficient. It speaks of separation agreements, division of assets, and legal proceedings. It represents a different kind of future. A future of clean breaks and painful endings. A future of explaining to my family that my marriage has failed. A future of profound, terrifying loneliness. But also, a future where I don't have to live with the constant low-level hum of suspicion. A future where my self-respect remains intact. A future that is my own. Clara's ultimatum still hangs in the air, a silent final demand. Move to London and try to rebuild on shattered ground, or stay in Germany and accept that the woman I married is gone forever. To leap or to let go. I stare at the two tabs, at the two futures they represent. For the first time in months, my mind isn't racing. The internal debates have quieted. There is only a vast, empty stillness. I know a choice must be made. I close my laptop. A word to the reader. To anyone who has read this far, thank you. You have been a silent witness to the most painful chapter of my life. I have laid my heart bare not for sympathy, but for perspective. I am lost, standing at a crossroads, and I feel like any direction I choose is the wrong one. My own thoughts are a tangled mess of love, anger, guilt, and pride. This is where my story ends, for now, and where I hope yours can begin. I am turning to you, the collective wisdom of strangers, for the clarity I can no longer find within myself. I need your advice, your criticism, your shared experiences. I ask you to consider these questions that haunt my waking hours. In your opinion, can trust truly be rebuilt in a marriage after a betrayal of this nature? Not just managed or tolerated, but genuinely restored to what it once was. If you were in my shoes, would you accept the ultimatum? Would you move to the UK and place your future in the hands of a woman who has already broken her most sacred promise? Is the chance of salvaging 7 years of love worth that gamble? Am I being too harsh in my expectation for a more profound, unconditional apology? Is her justification, that my failure to keep a promise led to her actions, in any way valid? Or am I right to see it as a complete refusal to take responsibility? In a relationship, which is the greater transgression, a failure to keep a promise about actions, like moving, or a failure to uphold the promise of faithfulness, where does the ultimate responsibility lie? My personal story has become a universal dilemma. I am sure many of you have faced your own versions of this impossible choice, your own moments where love and betrayal collide. By sharing your thoughts, you are not just helping a stranger on the internet. You are participating in a larger conversation about love, trust, and what it means to build a life with another person. What should I do?